Welcome to the second episode of Founded in Transcreation, where we delve into how brands cross borders with their creative communication. I am Delfina Morganti Hernández, a seasoned English into Spanish for Latin America marketeer and copywriter, and today I will be introducing my translator and transcreator colleague, Eva Katernberg. Together, we will discuss how we often approach a transcreation project with our respective clients. And because we love creative challenges, we will also attempt to transcreate or creatively render into German and some Spanish varieties the branded slogan, "Just Do It" by Nike. Before we move on to that, let me tell you a bit more about my guest today, guest and co-host, actually. Eva is a French and English into German localizer, transcreator, and translator. She has been living in France for the last 4.5 years, first in the east of France and now in the Paris area. Her professional path has not been crystal clear to her, but with time and a lot of trial and error, she finally found her way in localization and transcreation. Now she happily works on website, software and marketing material translations with a focus on topics like UX and tech, business, marketing and sustainability. Eva, welcome to Founded in Transcreation, and thank you very much for accepting my invite. How are you today?
Hello, thank you so much for your invitation. I was very happy when you asked me, and I'm very well. And how are you today?
Very excited, as I was telling you before we started recording this podcast, and grateful for your time and for your ideas, right? This is a very creative task that we've undertaken to do. So I'm really glad that I found someone willing to take part in this podcast.
Sure.
Well, just a little bit of background for the people who may be listening to this podcast for the first time. Founded in Transcreation is a podcast about a niche, in a way, about transcreation as a service within the localization and marketing industries, and includes in its name a word with the verb to find and its past participle found, and the verb to found and its past tense founded. Because personally, in my case, and I think this is also Eva's case, as she will tell us in a while, transcreation is the service within the localization industry where, for me, it all began, like I say, or the adventure began when I discovered that I could combine my writing, rewriting, marketing, and translation skills into one service that's very specifically used for language adaptation when it comes to advertising, messaging, game localization, or rather video game transcreation, and other kinds of materials that are highly creative and emotional, and that require somehow a service that goes a little bit further than translation per se. If you missed the first episode, please listen to it, where I discuss and define transcreation in more detail, and I also provide an example that will be very fun to listen to. Okay, so Eva, I have a few personal questions for you so that we introduce you to the audience. Where are you right now?
Like location-wise, right now I'm in Paris, or rather in the suburbs of Paris in France. But I'm actually German, so I am not a French person by origin, but that's where I have been living for the past 4.5 years, approximately. Yes.
All right. But right now, at this moment, you are...
Like city-wise, or just sitting?
Sitting.
Yeah, I'm sitting at home, just in my one-room Paris apartment.
Okay.
That is way too expensive.
All right. Well, your background is in business management, marketing, user experience, right. And then you moved on to localization?
Yes, my background is way too diverse, but this is also probably a strength, I think, and why I went into transcreation in the end and localization, which were two specializations I had never heard of before, I think, since a year ago, which is very interesting. Yeah, so maybe I can just fill you in a little bit about my career background as a whole. Yeah. So it's very complicated, but let's start after my high school degree. So after my high school degree, I decided to study linguistics. And this was not a very obvious choice at that time. I basically had always loved languages since I was super small and was super excited every time I had a new language in school. When I started English, I was so happy. Started French, I was so excited. But as it's sometimes the case, I think school kind of killed my motivation for languages. And when I graduated, I was mostly into chemistry, biology, physics. I was more in the science department. But I kind of realized after my degree that I did not really like those topics. I was quite good at them, but I didn't really like them. However, a friend of mine gave me a book about linguistics, like really hardcore etymology and phonology and language families, and had never really learned about that in school or anywhere else. And I was so fascinated that I decided to study linguistics.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was not the obvious choice, but I was like, okay, this is really fascinating. I want to know more about those topics. So I went into this, but I also knew that being like a scientific linguist is not the path that will open many career options for you. So I went for economics and business as my minor. Yeah, so then I basically started studying this. And 2 weeks in, I was like, I don't know. Because I still really love linguistics and I still really love language learning. But my problem, I think, for one, was that I didn't really like the university I was and the city I was in. So I personally just didn't feel very good. And also I felt like I just wasn't capable of doing 3 years of a bachelor's degree where I had to learn by heart so many theories and very theoretical concepts that are interesting to me, but that I would never really use in a real job. Because even today, as a linguist, you kind of indirectly use those things maybe, but you're not really a scientific linguist in everyday life. And I didn't really want to become a PhD in linguistics. So I kind of felt like, okay, that's not it. So I dropped out, I think 3 weeks in, which was very early. And then I was a bit lost and started studying economics and business administration just as a major as a whole, which I never really liked, but I kind of pulled through. And I think I pulled through because it had a lot more tangible outcomes, right? I felt like, okay, even though I'm not really into finance or not that much into microeconomics, at least this is something that I might use in a job one day. Or marketing was really interesting. I already really liked marketing at the time for its psychology aspect and just the human aspect of it. And I also, during the first semesters, continued studying languages, but more like business English, business French. And because my school offered those courses, and as I still really liked language learning, I was like, okay, let's do that so I can get through those 3 years. And then I think my life kind of changed with my Erasmus degree, or my Erasmus semester, sorry. Because my boyfriend at that time really wanted to go to France. I wasn't that much into France. I was more interested by Italian and other countries at that time. And but he really wanted to go to France, and I really wanted to do a semester abroad as well. So I was like, okay, why not? Let's go to France together. That's how I ended up in Paris for my semester. And this was really like the best semester I had, because all the semesters before I did not really enjoy university, but this semester was so great. I was learning French with real French people, living a new culture, and it was just so amazing that I decided, okay, I need to come back for my master's degree. I do not want to continue with German university, as I also much appreciated the French system, which is way more practical and not as theoretical as the German system. And so I went back to Germany. I finished my bachelor degree. And then I had 6 months of nothing because I kind of started in April with university in Germany, but in France you can only start in September. So I finished in February and had 7 months to gap. And that's when I worked as a journalist in Germany. I had already previously done some internships and I had really liked it. And I was like, okay, why not? I can just work as a freelance journalist in the newspaper I have already worked for. So I did that kind of full time during 7 months. And I liked it a lot. And this also influenced my choice for my master's degree. So I was set on going back to France. And I was really interested in the European Union at the time because I thought, oh, I will be maybe a journalist. So it would be really nice to have like this international component in there. So yeah, I found this master's program in the east of France that was called Communication for the European Union. And so it was a mix of economics, politics, legal stuff, and languages and communications. And yeah, so I went to France. I did this master's degree, which was great. I loved the city I lived in. It was Nancy. It's probably not very well known outside of France, but really nice student town. So for everyone who wants to come to France.
Okay.
And yeah, this was a great 2 years. After those 2 years, I had to do an internship. So I did it in communications because I figured, okay, I want to stay in France, which was something that developed in the 2 years I was there. So I didn't want to go back to Germany, but this also implied that I couldn't be a journalist anymore. Because being a journalist, you really need to speak the language perfectly. And as well as I speak French, I'm not a native speaker. I still have a little accent. I still make tiny mistakes. So journalism wasn't it anymore. So I thought, okay, communications. I already studied that. Okay, let's go for that. Yeah, you can see my path is very...
It's amazing. I really like it. Yeah, I was just going to say that we have several things in common. I didn't know we had these two in common. The fact that somehow our career path is nurtured by miscellaneous disciplines and fields of study. There is like, as I think this is also true for many people, that when you graduate from school, you don't necessarily, your vocation doesn't necessarily come up, as something so apparent, so evident. And also when it does, that's not no guarantee. When you know what you want to do for your life, there's no guarantee that there will be a university course matching exactly that that vocation that will fulfill yourself, your potential, and everything. So I think this is part of our search, right? I think it's only natural, and I think it's enriching to find a translator like you with such a background.
It's such a background.
I mean, as a potential client or employer, I would be more interested in a profile like yours because it's somehow more diverse, right? And even if you didn't enjoy everything that you got into, you have that background, you have different perspectives.
The knowledge is there.
And I think that's, sorry, I interrupted you. You were
no problem.
About
that's interesting.
To say something else about your story. And
yeah, I wanted to say as well that it's so true that nobody knows after school what they want to do. And I always thought, okay, maybe there's some job out there that I don't even know about that I will do one day. And this is exactly what happened. So that I did my internship in communications in a little startup in Paris because I moved here because I met my now boyfriend in the east of France. And he needed to go for work to Paris because France is very centralized and all work is in Paris, right? So I kind of followed, and now we live here. Yeah, and so I did this little internship, and it's not a little, it's like a 6-month internship in this small startup in Paris. And I kind of did everything. They didn't have anyone for communication, so I did their website, I did their social media, their blog articles, everything, which was great because I could see so many different jobs. But I also realized that the real pure communication part was really not what I wanted to do every day. like social media posts and community management. I was not so much into that. But I really liked the website part. So I really liked enhancing their website, making it more user-friendly, more prettier, etc. So I was like, oh, I had this course about user experience design in my master's degree. Why couldn't I maybe do that? And initially I tried just getting internships in that and just pivoting over. But in the end, I found that it might be better to have a degree in it maybe, which is when I decided to do I don't know if there's an equivalent in English, but basically in France, you can do a sort of master's degree where you work on the site and you go to school once a week. Yeah, it's called alternance. So I did that. And I did it in Allianz. I'm not sure if you have Allianz in Argentina, like the insurance company. It's a big German insurance. Yeah. So
yeah,
I work.
Yes, there are branches of it here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so it's a big multinational insurance company, and I worked for them for the French branch as the product owner for user experience. So I kind of got my feet into this area, and it was super interesting. But at the same time, something that had always been the case came back up, that I really do not like being an employee. I had never liked being an employee. Every job
Why?
I like, I don't know, I feel it's so, I don't know, it's too strict in a way. Maybe it's a French thing, but in France, you need to be there between like 9 and 6. And if you go home before 6, even though you finished your work, it's like, oh, did you take your afternoon? And like, no, I'm just done with my work.
Right. So you had like this entrepreneurial calling or something like that, and you ended up being an independent worker. Okay.
Exactly. So, sorry, it's nearly done the story.
Okay, it's really interesting. Okay, is there any particular tip or piece of advice that you would like to give to perhaps someone who's still trying to decide on whether they get into the localization industry or not, in case we have any translators listening to us?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I feel like how I got into it in the end was kind of random, and maybe can be interesting to some people that want to change. Because actually, when I pivoted into this industry, I had never studied it, right? So I went out of this office job and I started freelancing, but I started freelancing as a UX researcher because I had done this in my office job. But I was kind of sure that I didn't want to continue with that. But then localization and transcreation kind of found me, because I had never really heard about that. So that really goes well with the title, right? It was found by Transcreation. And actually my first freelance client hired me because I'm German and I know UX research, and he wanted someone to review the German translations. And as it's a user testing company, they wanted someone with user testing knowledge. And they actually do a lot of great localizations. So I still work with this company and they have a great localization process. And I didn't even know this existed. I had heard of translation for sure, and also of interpreting. But this is always like legal or medical certificates. And I had never really thought about website translation or software translation. I don't know why, because it's obvious they are translated, but I just didn't know that this was like a field. Plus localization includes cultural stuff, and I didn't know that there was a job that included all of those things that I really like IT and business, marketing, but at the same time languages, culture, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. And that's finally when I started pivoting and only accepting transcreation localization clients and not UX clients anymore. And that's what I do now. So I think, a tip, I don't know, sometimes I feel like maybe transcreation especially is a field where you do not really even need to study the languages maybe, but more the topics that you're writing about or that you're translating. Because I think you also started marketing, right?
Yes, yes. But my case was a little bit different. I began taking like a very intense interest in advertising and marketing because I was transcreating texts. So I mean, in my case, what happened was, wow, there's this thing called transcreation where so many fields of study somehow are required, or ideas, or kind of like, there's it's such a multidisciplinary field, diverse field.
Sure.
That I could combine all the things that I knew and the things that I loved doing, creativity. And then I thought, why not be on the other side? Why not try to be on the side of the creatives who actually draft or create and brainstorm and do the brief? And I was curious about being on the side of the creators of the source text. And then connecting the dots, in hindsight, I realized that when I was young, I used to play with a neighbor, and we used to try to imitate radio commercials, and we used to do voices, and we used to do for example, Spray It, which is a very widespread one all around the world. Call us now, we will be selling this to you. And we would pretend that we were doing commercials, and I liked recreating songs, and I liked sort of localizing Celine Dion songs into Spanish. And
oh God, I did that too. Now that you're saying that, I was always singing songs on the radio that were in English, and my mom and I were just like simultaneously translating them into German, but like stupid German, and then just like literal translation.
Yeah, me too. Stupid Spanish.
Yes.
But yeah, when you kind of retrace the steps and try to see why did I end up here?
Yeah.
Why did I end up here, right? And because it was, for me, it was unexpected too. And it somehow led me to study a new course and everything. Well, I realized that the games that I used to play were connected with, all of them were connected with creativity, and some of them were connected with advertising, even though I didn't know at that time that there was, yes, a university course, a degree in advertising. I wouldn't have imagined I would end up here, and I bet that you somehow wouldn't have either. I mean, when you were studying finance, for instance, or working in journalism, and I think it's really interesting. That's why I wanted to use this first part of the podcast to actually interview you on that. So how would you define transcreation for people who might be listening for the first time? We can do this together, but I'd like to listen to you, to hear your take from your experience. There's no rights or wrongs.
I kind of feel like for me it's it's translating. It's a form of translation, but it's a more liberal form of translation where it's more about getting the meaning and the emotion across rather than the words, like the actual words. It doesn't need to be the same words in the end, but it does need to convey the same meaning in a way, like the same intention and the same, it must, no, how do you say that? Like if the original text made me want to buy something, the new translated text needs to make me want to buy something as well, for example, or you know what I mean?
Right. So it's kind of like recreating the feelings and emotions rather than, well, the meaning is there. I mean, we have to be accurate. But I think that the key word in your definition was liberal, which doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want.
No, for sure. Still needs to be the same essence.
Yes. And it's funny how it's not so easy to define transcreation. And whenever you ask someone or a company or a team, everyone will define it in a different way. Because it's so connected with our limbic brain. We are trying to put into words, right? I always also think, and I also think this applies to literary translation, that we don't really translate in literature, in fiction, in poetry, and we don't really transcreate the source text, but our personal, very subjective interpretation of that source text.
True.
And in transcreation, also, like you said, Eva, we are somehow working within the constraints of the effect that the brand, the client, the author of the source text wants to have on the target audience. So we're working with words thinking more of the result and the conduct and how the audience's conduct will be influenced by those words is a completely different perspective for the person doing that job from translating it, right? When you translate, you don't necessarily focus so much on the effect. You do have to take context into account. Yes, you do have to take meaning into account, of course. But, you know, literal translation sometimes works with certain technical scientific texts, but not with texts such as slogans, taglines, or ad copy. What are some examples of materials or messages that you have had to transcreate? And you don't necessarily need to bring up any brands.
No, it's interesting because I was just thinking about something that is more of like where the culture behind it was a reason you needed to transcreate it. Because recently I work for a sustainable sneaker brand, and they have lots of puns and wordplays. That's why they have a transcreator on the team rather than like just a translator. And for the COVID pandemic and everything around that, they needed to have a couple of communications sent to their clients about like what are the measures taken in our shops, what is the new return policy, etc., etc. And they also had this campaign in a way where they were donating sneakers to the health workers. And there was an email like, thank you so much, you're like heroes, go here and grab your free pair of shoes, which works great. It's a brand from the UK. So this works really well, I think, in a UK context because they are really attached emotionally to their NHS, right? Which is not at all the case in Germany. There is no such thing as an NHS in Germany. So when I transcreated this email, I kind of had to tone it down a bit because in the intent of wanting to feel the German consumer the same way the UK consumer feels when he sees the mail, the UK consumer will just feel, oh yes, I love my NHS. What a great action, what a great campaign. However, the German consumer reading the same mail will just feel awkward probably, because it's just too much. Like we do not really love in an emotional way our health system, right?
Right, so, yeah.
I kind of took the same words, but toned it down a little. And I think in this way, I transcreated it to have the same emotion for both of the consumers, because the same words would have made the German consumers felt differently about the brand, I think. So this is example.
Okay, good, very good example. You know, this thing with like and love is an issue really with certain slogans and brands. I don't remember the case exactly, but for listeners who may be interested in Googling this, McDonald's had to transcreate I'm loving it into Chinese, and they had to use a different verb really because of cultural issues. And so I think that here again, you have provided us with a very key insight concerning what makes the transcreator one, which is the fact that you need to have this very cultural sensitivity, right, in order to adapt the text, the message in a manner that will really resonate with the target audience, not offend the target audience, not lead that audience to think of something else that is not connected with the message. And again, I think it's a very, very psychological, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary service, and I guess that's why we like it, right? We are
I just hate when it's too uni.
Yeah, me too. It's for these kind of people, right? For weirdos, for people who are kind of like straying from the one key single path. I mean, it takes all sorts to make a world, right? And I think transcreation is that service where we feel more at ease because of that. It has to do with personality, I guess, too.
Probably.
All right. Well, let's move on a little bit to how we approach a transcreation task or project, kind of like behind the scenes of what we do, a little bit, because I think that's what's going to be most interesting to our audience is actually how we would transcreate, just do it into our mother tongues or other target languages. Well, we've already discussed a little bit about what types of contents we usually transcreate. When we talk about transcreation approach, I think it's kind of like again, it depends, right? It varies depending on the person undertaking the job. How would you describe yours? And then I'll try to describe
My approach.
mine.
So my approach in general, I mean, let's start when I get the client, right? Because it kind of starts there already. When I get a new client, I was lucky so far that they always had some kind of brand voice guidelines or glossaries and kind of an idea on how they want their brand voice to sound. So usually I start with getting familiar with all of that. If there is no brand voice, I think I would just read a lot of their website content, a lot of their blog articles, just to get a general idea about their voice. And then you always have the specific brief as well, right? So you get a tagline to transcreate, a headline or an email, and they will tell you, okay, this is destined to this audience. That's what we want the people to do. This is the campaign it is in. So you have kind of an idea on what you're supposed to do. I often, for the sustainable shoe brand, need to transcreate headlines or slogans. And as I told you, they are very pun heavy and wordplay heavy. So it always takes a lot of time for like 3 words to find a new way to say it. Then they often have character restrictions as well, which is not the greatest for German because German words are so long. So many restrictions. And I kind of think I mostly break it down into the essence. I think I start with a literal translation, which I mostly do with all of my translations. I just write down like a draft of a literal translation.
Good.
Sometimes that works, right? Sometimes if the slogan is not, or the headline is not too complicated, that might even work. So great, especially because German and English sometimes kind of have the same structure. But more often than not, it does not work. So then I more sort of break down the essence of the slogan. Is there an alliteration? What are the most important words? Which words should I not delete in my new transcreation? What do we want to say with this slogan? What do we want? How should the consumer feel that reads it? What's the intent? So I kind of take some notes on that, and then I go from there. I don't know if you do it kind of the same way, or
I use some of those tactics. It's funny how I never really it's not that I have an outline of, okay, this is my transcreation workflow or process.
No,
because it's kind of difficult to do that because, as you know from your experience as well, every client tends to be different. Every message tends to require kind of like a different approach. But I do agree in that the brainstorming works in sort of the same way across projects. For example, when you mentioned the brief is something that your client should actually provide to you, and if they don't, it's something that you should request, because it's basically the limits within which you will be using your creativity to recreate that message. What the target audience is, what the target market, the segment, right? And if possible, the buyer persona. What's this person reading the message or listening to it on TV or something like? What are they like? Where do they live? What's their lifestyle like? What are their interests are like and stuff? What I usually do, first of all, I work, I use paper. I need to feel a little bit confident because these messages tend to be a little bit groundbreaking if they use, like you said, wordplay, alliteration and figures of speech as they normally do. At first I'm a little bit like, wow, this is amazing, it sounds awesome in English. And then I'm like, how the heck am I going to recreate the message into Spanish? It's not possible.
Panic.
Right. So I panic. First workflow, panic.
Panic.
So I start with that feeling. And fascination with the source text, panic as regards the future. Within the task, and then I use paper. I need to try. I copy if it's a short message, like a 3-word slogan or something like that. Like I did with Just Do It by Nike, I write it down. And that gives me sort of like the feeling that I'm kind of befriending the source text there. It's like, okay, let's get together and do something together into Spanish, please, because I'm getting paid to do this. Okay, so I have to do it with some sort of responsibility. And I work, like I said, with a paper notebook, and I put it in the center of a page, and I start working with arrows, right? I do, like you said, I work first into, okay, what's the most literal version I get? What's the first thing I think of? And there I start creating like not exactly a mood board, but something like my brainstorming works with
mind map,
concepts.
right?
So I write down like a mind map. Exactly. Thanks. I work with my, okay, what emotions do I get from this text? How does it make me feel? What do I think of any sort of particular place, color? I work with synesthesia.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like that. I feel things with words mostly. So I work with that, with sort of subconscious interpretations. And then, because it's usually, within the brief and the assignment or client's request, I usually get a source file, whether it be a video, like they tell me, okay, this claim will be inserted at the end of this commercial. Or we will be using this within this PowerPoint presentation, or this will be stamped on a t-shirt, okay? Or listen, it's for an app and we have character restrictions. We can't use over 25 characters, including spaces. Okay, so I use that, and I try to watch the commercial or read the source text, leave the brainstorming aside and try to see, okay, how do I feel? What do I interpret from this? What are they trying to do? What kind of response does the brand want to elicit from, the audience? And I work and I get immersed into the source experience.
Yes.
And then I go back to the brainstorming and try to merge everything into at least 3 different options. If it was a slogan, a tagline, a claim, hashtag, or a short message. And if it's a longer text, there's usually no time, for me at least, this is my experience, there's usually no time to work on several different options. But what I generally do, even if the client doesn't request this, is include back translations into English, because more often than not, they don't really know what they're getting into with transcreation, or they're a little bit scared. I mean, what is this linguist going to do with my branded message? I mean, are they going to twist it altogether? Where are they? Why? Okay, I need this service, but what's going to happen with my brand identity and voice? Okay, so I use back translation to bring confidence to them.
Do you mostly work with brands that do not have any Spanish speaker on their team that could evaluate your transcreation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, most of the times. Yes.
Yeah, so back translations are really key for you, right? Then.
Yes, and for them, and English is the language for conversation or communication with that end client. Yes. So yes, back translations are kind of like really necessary, even if they don't ask for them. And when they do, well, of course, I provide them. So that's kind of like, it's very messy if you come to think of it. Yeah. Sometimes I once transcreated a song for an app, and it was, I had to sing along, like, then I couldn't sleep after that, because the song like kept, I kept humming the song, and I didn't want to, but it kept coming to me. I was like, no, and I was like, oh my God. But it happens.
But that's so important, right? I also transcreated like a TV ad for some German TV channels, but like also for this brand. I do like so much work with this sustainable sneaker brand. Most of my examples come from there, but yeah, they're really great. So and the same, I was like just transcreating the text, and then I was basically recording myself in a Loom. I don't know if you know the tool Loom, and I was just doing the voice over myself just to check if the length works, because German words are so long, right? And the commercial was really short, so I couldn't just hurry through all of my words, so it needed to be short enough. I was just re-recording myself over and over again to see if it works as a speaker. And it's like, next summer, this thing is coming to the market. like a voiceover artist would do. And I'm like, oh my God. So I think this is often part of our experience.
Yes, I think that what you're just describing shows just how underestimated translation in general is, but transcreation too, right? It's only 3 words. Do it, like just do it. And it's not a just do it thing, right? You have to check so many things, and besides, you have this particular challenge posed by your language. Every language will pose a particular set of challenges, but it's true that German does have very long words in general. So it's like a super challenge, I guess, for you to render messages with wordplay, with humor, with puns into German, right?
I guess it's like the challenge that you have with Latin American Spanish, because all of the countries have such different Spanish. You cannot just take the Argentinian version and it will work everywhere. So I cannot even imagine.
Yeah. I always feel it happens to me that I always feel tempted to say, okay, this is how we would say it in Argentinian slang, and it fits perfectly, and I feel it exactly the same way. But then no, if the target language is Latin American Spanish, that's also but it's part of the process. It's like a translation within translation. It's like interlinguistic translation between varieties. I'm fascinated though by the process. I think it's the thing that I love the most doing this. More than revising copy, more than anything apart from writing.
And do you use any special tools, for example? Do you have any websites that you frequently use while transcreating to help you with your brainstorming process, maybe?
Yes, I hadn't thought of that, but when I work with a localization company, the tools are somehow there. Sometimes we don't use anything other than a Word file or an Excel file with columns, for the back translations, for my comments, for the client's feedback. And other times when we are transcreating visual copy, something like, app content, for example, I'm usually provided with a user login for SmartLink. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. It's a cloud-based CAD tool that includes that has a very interesting preview feature where you can actually see how the content will be displaying on a user screen. You can see if the formatting will be cutting words, for example. So it's very useful for projects with character restrictions or limitations and stuff. Do you use CAD tools or anything like that?
Not so much. I have also something, I guess it's like SmartLink. It's called Phrase App, and it's the same. It has this preview feature, which is really helpful. It's used by one of my clients, the user testing client, so I use that. But what I was a bit hinting is, like, I often use websites for my research, and I always come back to the same specific websites for my research. For example, there is a website, I don't know if it's only for German, but it's called phrasen.com. It's like
I've never heard of it.
And it's so useful because especially if I have a slogan to transcreate that includes a specific word that I think needs to be there in the new slogan, in the German slogan, then you can type in this word and it will show you sort of like word plays with this word, or proverbs that use this word, or just like sentences that use this word. And it's so good. And then I just go through all of these pages and I'm like, okay, in which context could I use the word step in German? And then it just shows me lots of sentences which like nice renderings of step, and like, that could fit, this could fit. So this is a really useful page for me. I don't know if you have, but CAD tools not so much, except for this phrase up thing.
No, is it only into German?
Maybe it's only a German page.
Oh, we should have something like that.
It's so useful. I found it one day and I'm like, oh.
I know that research is necessary. It's an absolutely necessary step. Going into the internet, sometimes even asking. I poll people, I poll friends, I poll family members. Sometimes, without mentioning the brands or what I'm working on, I just say, "How would you say this?" I call it the kind of like a surprise attack, right? I want to grasp what they would say, you know, as fresh speakers of the target language. And even if their versions are not the ones I end up using, they always provide me with things that I use for my brainstorming. And I also think it's important that, you know, despite the fact that we do need to research and stuff, that we don't get so conditioned by the internet. Because I realize that once I start Googling things, I also may be somehow censoring my own brainstorming process. So I try, now that you mentioned this, I realize, because again, I never stopped to devise a plan or process, but I realized that I work separately, like in phases or stages, with my notebooks, with my notebook and notes and ideas, with my mind map on one hand, with the client's brief on the other, and the internet. I try to use the internet last to somehow complete the process, and well, I think it works. It's worked so far. I'm still doing it. Well, this has been a very, very enriching discussion. I suggest that we do a short break. Then we just plunge into the creative challenge of trying to render just to it. Yes, into German and Spanish. So, if you've enjoyed this first part of the second episode of Founded in Transcreation with Eva Katernberg, please go ahead and listen to the second part. You will really enjoy listening to how we delve into how Nike's Just Do It tagline would sound into German and into Spanish in different varieties and versions. Stay tuned.